I'm going to start this macro sharpening tutorial by looking at the end result, just to give you an idea of the techniques that we're going to use. Here we have two layers. The top layer has been sharpened, the bottom layer has had the noise removed, so it's actually quite soft. And we've got a mask that blends the sharpened areas here with the background areas here to create a nice balanced shot with no noise, but with nice sharp details. Let me just press Z for the zoom tool and right click to use the actual pixels, and you can see the sharpened details here are being revealed quite clearly. If I shift click on the mask, we can turn that sharpened mask off, and now we're still seeing the sharpened details here, but you've got lots of picture noise showing up in the rest of the shot. Turn the mask on again and the noise disappears, but these areas here stay sharp. So we've got selective sharpening using layers and layer masks. Let's kick off by opening our raw start file, which is called Sharpening before. If you drag that into the Photoshop interface, it will recognize it's a DNG file, a digital negative file, and it will open it up in the Camera Raw Editor, and that's where we're going to tweak the colors and tones and even crop the shot to improve composition before we start to sharpen it. The first thing we're going to do is crop the shot, both to improve composition and get a little tighter look at these focus petals and lose some of the blur background. But it's also worth cropping the shot before you sharpen, because sharpening is dependent on the size of the shot. A larger shot will need more sharpening and a smaller shot will need less. If you apply too much sharpening to the smaller shot, then you might create sharpening artifacts like halos and blown out highlights and picture noise. So it's always good to start with a crop. So to crop the shot, click and hold down here just to make sure it's set to normal, and you can also tick constrain to image if it's not ticked, so that you keep the same aspect ratio or shape of the cropped shot. Then just click and drag to select the whole image, like so, and then move into one of the corner handles, and you can also hold down the shift key, and that will constrain the cropping window as well to keep the same shape as the original shot. You can then choose a shot that's smaller and then drag inside the cropped window to position it like so. So we've got this bit of petal here and this one here in frame, and we've now got a closer look at our flower. Now to see the cropped version of that image, we can click on another tool like the zoom tool, and we now have our cropped shot. To the naked eye, the shot looks fairly underexposed, and we can confirm that by looking at the histogram, and you can see there's not very much detail in the highlight section of the graph or in the darkest shadows. So it's worth tweaking the tones to make them look perfect before you start to sharpen the shot, because sharpening also changes contrast, and that could end up blowing out some of your highlights, for example. So kick off by going to exposure, and we'll drag that slider to the right to a stop of about 1, just to brighten up the shot, and you can see we've got more detail now in the highlight section of the histogram. Let's pop to the blacks and boost those by dragging the slider to the right, and round about a value of 10 gives us blacker looking blacks and a wider range of shadows and highlights. So we've now fixed our contrast problem. And to make sure we haven't got any blown out highlights before we start sharpening, I'm just going to zoom in, and if we press the highlight clipping warning on the top right here, or press O for overexposed, you can see we do have some highlights being clipped, so we can recover that missing detail by dragging the slider to the right to around about a value of 30 or so. Should do the trick. There we go, that'll do. And we can also boost the colours of the shot just to bring out subtle texture details here by dragging vibrance up to around about 30 or so. In fact, 20 should do the trick, and that gives us a much more vibrant looking flower. Let me just right click to fit in view, and what I'll do is I'll click here to show you the before, flat contrast, dull colours, and there's the after. It's looking much better already. So we've improved colour, tone and composition. We're now ready to sharpen the shot. To take a closer look, grab the zoom tool, right click and choose 100%, and then use the spacebar to get the hand tool, and we'll have a look at an area that should actually be sharp, like this petal here. It's still a little bit soft, so we can certainly reveal more detail here, but we've also got some nasty picture noise as well, especially in areas of smooth colour like this area here. That noise would look worse if we had a higher ISO setting, only 200 at the moment, but it's still there and it can still be exaggerated when we try and sharpen up the more important details like so. Now the Photoshop Elements Camera Raw Editor does have a Detail tab that does automatically try and sharpen the shot by an amount of 25 just to reveal more detail around the edges of objects in the frame, but it's not that good at actually targeting these areas here without actually creating noise in the rest of the shot. It can be done, but we're going to look at an alternative and easier and more free way of sharpening our shot and reducing noise. So let's just take amount down to 0 for the moment, and then take detail down to 0 as well, because we're actually going to use different techniques in the standard Photoshop editor. So to do that, click Open Image, and you'll open up the shot in the standard Photoshop editor, and we can then use layers and layer masks to selectively sharpen our shot, and we'll create a document like the one you saw at the beginning of this walkthrough. Here we go, it's opening up the shot now, and there we have it on a locked background layer. Now to edit our locked file, we need to double click to unlock it, and then if you were editing in 16 bits in the raw editor, you can click convert depth, and that will change it to an 8 bits per channel image, and then we can use lots of Photoshop tools to actually sharpen the shot. Click OK, and what you'll end up with is layer 0. The padlock has gone. We can now edit the layer, and the first thing we're going to do is copy it by dragging it onto the create new layer icon at the bottom, and we now have two identical versions of our flower. So we're going to sharpen the top layer to reveal lots of lovely detail in these petals, and we're going to apply a reduced noise filter to the bottom layer to get rid of the nasty grain, and then we'll use a layer mask to take the best bits from the top layer and mix them with the best bits from the bottom layer. So to sharpen the top layer, click to select it, go to Enhance, choose Adjust Sharpness, and then up pops the Adjust Sharpness command window. We can then click and drag to find an area that should be nice and sharp, like this petal here. Now if I click to hold down the mouse button, you can see the before version, slightly blurry, let go, and with a default setting of 100, you can see it's actually slightly sharper already. And if we push this contrast change a little bit further to around about 174 or so, then if I click and hold down, there's the blur, let go, and it's looking even sharper now. I can increase the spread of the contrast change around edges of details in the shot by pushing radius to the right. If we go too far, you'll notice that we've got clipped shadows, blown out highlights, and lots of noise, garish colours. So let's take that back down to around about 1.9, and that should look a lot better. There's the before, there's the after, and it's definitely looking much sharper now. We can create a slightly more subtle sharpening amount by changing the remove from Gaussian blur to lens blur, and that just creates a little delicate sharpening effect. It reveals the finer details there, but it's not quite as strong as the Gaussian blur setting. You might think the more refined is a good thing to tick, but when you do, it tends to try and refine really fine details, and that tends to be picture noise in shots like this. So leave this box unchecked, and we're now ready to click OK to apply the changes. So we've sharpened the copy of layer 0, and we've got the original layer on the layer below. So let's just click on the top layer, right click and choose actual pixels, and we can then have a look at an area like this. If I turn off the top layer, you'll see the original underneath, and you can see it's much more soft. Turn the top layer on again to see the sharpened pixels, and they're now looking much more detailed. However, if I hold the spacebar down and have a look at some of these flat areas here, you can see they're much noisier on the top layer compared to the softer pixels on the original layer. So we've got unwanted noise with our sharpened top layer. What I'm going to do is add a mask to the top layer by clicking here, and in Photoshop Elements 9 this is the Add Layer Mask icon, which is a very handy tool indeed, and that adds a mask to the top layer. We can then click on the mask to select it, and Control I to inverse the mask to create a black mask, and that basically makes the top layer completely transparent so we can only see the layer below. We can now paint white brush strokes onto the mask to reveal the sharper areas that we need to see without showing the unwanted noise, and to do that I'm going to use the brush tool. So let's just drag the palette out of the dock, click here to show us the double column version, and we'll grab the brush tool. We'll choose a nice big brush of 300 pixels, and we'll set the foreground color to white. And if we reduce the opacity, it'll actually give us a grey brush stroke. Take it to about 40% or so. Click on the mask, and as we click and spray, that allows us to gently reveal some of the sharper pixels from the top layer. Hold the spacebar and move down like so. And there you can see that we're actually adding these sharper pixels just by spraying on the mask. But we're not going to go over the areas that have got lots of noise around the edge of these details, because we want to keep the noise to a minimum. So the layer mask enables us to see sharp details from the top layer and to reveal softer, noise-free details from the layer below, and that's a great way of selectively sharpening our shot. If I zoom out and then turn off the bottom layer temporarily, you can see that we've got the sharp pixels from the top layer, and then turn on the bottom layer again, and that's the original layer with the slightly noise-free, softer background pixels. So we've got the best of both worlds there, with our sharp details and our noise-free blurred background. And as a finishing touch, let's click on layer 0 and remove any traces of unwanted background noise by going to Filter, Noise, Reduce Noise, and up pops the Reduce Noise command window. And then if we set strength to 4, preserve details to 0, reduce color noise to 100. You can then see if I click, there's the before, still a bit noisy, there's the after, it's much more smooth. Click OK, and we're just smoothing out this background layer, but we're still seeing the nice sharpened pixels on the top layer thanks to the layer mask. And once you zoom in, you can see you've got the best of both worlds. Lots of lovely sharp texture and detail on this top layer, combined with noise-free, soft focus background pixels on the layer below. So that's a great way of producing selective focus effects using layer masks, layers, and filters.